Good morning. I am ready to do my podcast that I was supposed to do last night, but I couldn't. And I apologize for that. Um, this podcast is about life behind closed doors and sharing our truths. And last night, part of my truth was I had to sleep. So it's being real, and I believe that if we begin to share with each other our truths, things that usually are kept quiet and behind closed doors, the struggles, struggles that families and people have, um, if we begin to share them, that's going to help us become unity. And that's the goal. That's where we're at in this world, in this time. The world is changing, and it's time for us to come together as one, as a species, and stop fighting each other and stop, being just about ourselves and living for just ourselves. If we don't start to share and help each other, we're never going to get to where we're trying to get. And that's to a higher state of consciousness and a feeling and knowing of oneness with not just humans, but nature, animals, and the universe, the cosmos. And so that is why I'm doing what I'm doing on this channel, which is pretty much becoming as vulnerable as I can to share my truths that you may be having experiences with as well. And the truth that I'm going to be sharing today is pretty profound and pretty probably not a super common truth, but I know parts of it are for many people. This is just a big fuck mess, and it's because of a lot of things. So I hope that you who are watching have watched my podcast called My 7 Years with Jillian, and because it explains what an amazing little human she is, and she turned 7 in April, and she is a little empath. She was born that way, something I've never seen. I've had 5 children, and when she was an infant, before she could even talk, like I said on the other podcast, if a sad song came on or something that made her feel any sort of sadness, even if it was like a music box, she would start crying, and I would have to take it off, turn it off, and then she would stop and she would be okay. And as she got older, she would express, that's sad, turn it off, a movie or a song or whatever it was. And so I quickly learned that she was a severe, real, like, empath. And I haven't seen that in like an infant before. And it's, a lot of people who are empaths like myself, most of my life I thought it was a curse. And that's where she's at right now as a 7-year-old. It's not easy for her. And I am working on reprogramming her little program. Children from in utero to 7 years old, is that time frame is when they're programmed, completely programmed. So even in mama's belly, they can hear our voices, they can hear, our lifestyle, our tones, all the things. And then when they're born, they recognize the voices, the sounds, and they are little sponges. They're not conscious enough at this point to obviously know how to just be, to behave, to eat, to feed themselves, to do anything. And so they mimic and copy everything they see the important and significant adults in their lives do. So that is on us, right? To make sure our children are programmed correctly. And had I learned this sooner, things would have been different, but they're not. And I didn't. I've learned it now, and it's in time for me to help my little one. So Jill's conditioning came from solely me, not solely, but I was her parent, single parent, and I raised her in fear. I raised her in panic and trauma, and obviously not intentionally. My life story is rough, to say the least. And when I became pregnant with Jill, I was not supposed to be able to conceive or carry children at all. My abuser had hurt me so badly physically that I shouldn't have been able to carry children. And many, many years later, 7 years ago, I found myself pregnant. And this is after burying 2 children who died from the hands of my ex-abuser. So if you can imagine the fear that that instilled in me, knowing that I was going to be in charge of another child, and my experience so far was not great. You know, I had my 2 older daughters, and they had experienced the death of their siblings, and they were traumatized and going through such a hard time. And history began to repeat itself, essentially. So Colette, my oldest, Holly, my second oldest, experienced the death of their sister Poppy. They watched it. They were there through all of it. They had different reactions, you know, different personalities, different reactions. Colette did not do well at all. She struggled with her friends at school. She had changed in such a significant way with such significant trauma that she didn't feel that she could fit in with her friends anymore. She felt like she had experienced too much. And her friends, you know, she was 13. Poppy died on her 13th birthday. And her friends were into boys and, you know, all these things that she was also into before that. But then her nightmare happened, and she didn't feel she fit in anymore at all. And so she ended up dropping out of school, and she had severe depression. She had OCD with intrusive thoughts, and that started after the death of Poppy. It became a it became a coping mechanism for her. And I never looked at it that way until this last few weeks, and I'll tell you why. So, talking about history repeating itself. So, I got pregnant with Joe and had already lost 2 children, had gone through addiction, losing my older girls to staying with their father while I was going through addiction. I became homeless. And then 5 years after I started using heroin, I went into rehab and lived there for about a year, inpatient rehab, and I got clean. And my girls came back to live with me when they were older teenagers, maybe 17 and 15. I can't quite remember. And I stayed clean and sober. But I was white knuckling it, and I was still in fight or flight from the severe abuse that I endured for 7 years. And, you know, still trying to just comprehend it all, but I couldn't. And so I just let it go and began to use to cope. And so got clean, got my girls back, and I didn't know up from down. You know, in my mind, I was clean, so I was doing good. But I wasn't doing any conscious work. I wasn't even aware of consciousness. And, you know, I struggled. And I didn't relapse, but my behaviors and my thoughts were not as, at that time, you know, I was in my 30s, my older, you know, upper 30s, and I was still a child, basically. You know, I started using when I was 11, and that was my mind frame. You know, I didn't know how to adult. I didn't know how to do bills. I didn't know how to do anything that most adults know how to do. I shouldn't say most, because there's a lot of troubled people out there, and a lot of people born into situations where they just don't have the skills. And I wasn't born homeless or anything. You know, I had really good parents. They were very strict Christian, and it was very confusing, and it was very harsh. And I have to tell you, you know, my mom did her best, and she loved us very much. And because of that, you know, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was rough. And she is no longer in that. You know, she's all about the same things I am. You know, she believes in awakening and finding who we really are and becoming conscious and to reprogram ourselves and our conditioning. She believes in all that. So she's done a complete change, and I love her to death. She did the best she could, and I was, I'm thankful. And I'm thankful that they are where they're at now as well. I would love to do a podcast with my mom. You guys would love her. She's fucking incredible. She can lucid dream. She can make herself like leave in her dreams and go visit places. And I'm going to get off on this tangent. So we'll do a mom podcast soon. But so the bottom line is when I became pregnant with Jill, my fight or flight that I was already living in, I lived in fight or flight and panic for over 25 years, maybe more, maybe my whole life. I was born with borderline, so I was confused, and that added a lot. But I became pregnant with Jill, and my brain went, I'm responsible to keep another child alive. And fear, just without me knowing or even realizing, seeped in so severely that when Jill was born, I survived her instead of raising her. I took her temperature 45 times a day. I asked her if her tummy hurt all the time. I asked her if her head hurt. I was constantly feeling her forehead, and I was instilling fear in her without knowing it. In my mind, I was being a good mom, and I was keeping her alive, and I was keeping her safe. I didn't let her go see people. I kept her with me. She got to see my parents and her sisters. But I was so overly just aware of what can happen. I lived based on my kids can die. And so she didn't really stand a fair chance. And I can say it's my fault because it is. But I didn't know. I was so high off the ground, I couldn't see up from down. I had a caseload of clients. I was working as an advocate, so I was doing trauma work. And I was going out on calls in the middle of the night, having to take her to my mom's or my daughter's in the middle of the night to go do help with the police or at the hospital with like a rape victim or whatever it would have been, and then getting them to a safe space. So my whole life was trauma. My work life, my career, my home life, my parenting, and all of my history. And this is way before I knew anything about living in the moment, or leaving your past behind, or anything about how we're programmed and all the things. And so now I have a 7-year-old daughter who just lost her sister in January, her best friend. And she's over 7. Her programming is complete. And her programming is to be afraid of being sad, afraid of talking about feelings, afraid of sickness. If I have a cold, she's afraid. If she gets sick, she's afraid. And she has, so when Colette died, I didn't do well, obviously, burying my 3rd child and my firstborn. So 27 years with this one. And I just didn't know how I was going to make it through. I had started my awakening journey before she died, and Colette and I had a lot of talks around this kind of thing. She was very much spiritual and very much in tune with her higher self and all of the things. I wasn't as conscious of it as she was. And so when she died, obviously several weeks I was just down and just not well at all. And so thankful that this time, I had Brandon. I had someone that loved me, and we moved in with him a few weeks after Colette died. We were living next door, but we moved in together. And if it weren't for him, I don't know if we would even be as well off as we are now, which isn't great, but getting better. And I have all the confidence in the world that it's going to get better and better and better. Jill is intelligent and she is smart. And so when Colette died, for the first 6 months, I was not well. I went off into dark places in my head until I found this podcast by a neuroscientist talking about grief and chronic grief and what it looks like inside your brain. And it was very informative. And that literally snapped me out of my chronic grief. That's when I realized I had chronic grief. And chronic grief is different than grief. It is where you may have to be hospitalized. You may not be able to ever pull out. And that scared me enough to do more research, to continue to watch his podcasts and information, and stop what I was doing. And what I was doing was pretending that Colette was still alive. I was actually texting her, inviting her to do things with us. Deep down knowing she wouldn't answer, but also half believing she would. You know, I was losing my mind. And I was also trying to parent. And I was also trying to work. And my painting and my work went out the window for quite a while. And I would go to bed just screaming and crying every night in Randon's arms. And Jill seemed to be doing okay, you know, and people are always like, kids are resilient, kids are resilient. So she seemed to be doing okay. But what really was happening, I believe, is that she was waiting for me to get better. She was worried about me. And that's the same thing that Colette did when Poppy died. She spent the rest of her life worrying about me, making sure I was okay, because she couldn't imagine losing a child. And she saw what it did to me. And she was the oldest, so she took on that role. And I believe Jill began to do that as well. And I was so sick in grief that I didn't recognize it. And so when I got better, which I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life, but when I got better from thinking, you know, these crazy ideas that she's still somewhere out there and she could receive my texts and come to the river with us, and just things that weren't real at all. But my mind was so scared that that's what it started to do. So watching this podcast, I was able to see she's not here. She signed her soul contract. I signed my soul contract. She's doing what her path is. And that helped me a lot. Sorry. And if you want to learn about soul contracts, if you don't know much about them, please comment below and I will let you know, because it was a really big part of my healing. You know, and knowing that this is what she signed up for and this is what I signed up for, the only thing I could do from there is do my best. Because I made this deal to experience these experiences in this lifetime. And there were times I was like, why the fuck would I sign a contract to lose 3 children, to be abused so severe, to have borderline, all the things, you know, that just fucked my world up, my whole life, every relationship, all the things. But it doesn't matter why, because I did, and I did it for a reason. And it's for whatever reason, for whatever my past lives were, for whatever my past experiences were, this is what I needed to experience this time. And this whole life, my whole 45 years, everyone's, is full of lessons. And I'm conscious enough now to recognize these lessons. And when we get to that point and we start passing these tests and lessons and learning from them, instead of just continuing on down the road with our eyes closed like I was, because I didn't know how to open my eyes. I didn't know what to open my eyes to. I just lived in fear, just complete and utter fear of everything, to the point to where my best friend who lives states away would come once a year just to give me some peace. You know, she would play with Jill and let me sleep and take me out for a fun night. We would go stay in a hotel and laugh and watch movies and just be. And that began also some healing for me, recognizing how severe I needed to come down and relax and get out of fight or flight. I had so many severe mental breakdowns over the course of so many years, hospitalized, all the things, and I still couldn't slow down enough, and nobody could tell me what was going on. So I just kept going, raising my daughter, not the right way. She had all the love in the world, but she also had my trauma instilled into her. And then that comes with guilt, right? So then I have guilt that I did this to my child out of love, not love, out of real love, but uneducated and unknowing about our programming and our conditioning and what trauma really does. And it wasn't until about 4 months ago that I even realized how much the abuse that I endured, not even the death of my children, just the abuse that I endured alone had a hold on me. Still, up till a few months ago, that man still had a hold on me. And so since Colette's death, I have learned more in this 7 months than I have in my entire life. And I'm not thankful that she died, but I am thankful for the opportunity and the will for me to learn to live. You know, if I didn't have other kids, that might not have happened. But I have a 25-year-old, I have 3 grandkids, and I have Joe. And if I were to take my own life, the generational trauma would continue, and I'm fucking done with it. And I'm here to help my daughters and myself and my family and everybody who wants to be a part of this, because it's time to come together as one. Y'all know the world's changing. You all see what's going on. You all see all these people awakening and becoming conscious and learning about what we are and who we are, which is much more than we ever imagined. And so I'm joining in the best way I know how, which is to share my truths and to become as vulnerable as I can, so that those of you who are experiencing heartache and trauma behind closed doors know that other people are too. And it's okay to talk about it, and it's good to talk about it, because we can come together and help each other. It all comes down to unconditional love. Unconditional love, first and foremost, for yourself. And I had to go through that after the death of Colette. I had to, or I wasn't going to make it. So I researched and I read and I watched podcasts and I spent time alone and I meditated and I prayed and I did everything I could to figure out how to love myself after all of the things that I've lived through. And I accomplished it. I love Missy today. I've never been a bad person. I've been a lost person. And I do take responsibility for my choices. But I also know that I did not know better. The way I was raised was, we are Christian, we follow the Bible because I said so. You know, not a lot of sit down talks with my parents and learning and understanding. I didn't understand anything. It was just, I said so. No. And you're in trouble because I don't know what, you know, and I just became angry. I became angry, frustrated, scared, and confused. My first suicide attempt was at age 9. So loving myself was not an easy feat. You know, forgiving myself was not an easy feat, but I accomplished it. And my next thing is to forgive those who have hurt me. Forgive my abuser and the person involved in my daughter's death. And I'm working on that. And I will get there. And I will love them and I will be free. So that's a little bit of why Jill is struggling, because I conditioned her to live in fear. So I took about 6 months like I said, to get better. Still grieving, still sad, always will be, but not laying in bed dying. You know, I'm conscious. I miss Colette and I love her, but I have things here. She wouldn't want me to let this go. She loves her sister so much, and I'm gonna make her proud. I'm gonna fucking make her proud. So once I got better is when Jillian began to grieve. Like I said, it's like she waited for me to be done, and she wanted to make sure I was okay. You know, if I would watch Adventure Time, which is mine and Colette's show, she would say, "Good job, Mommy, you're doing a good job." You know, she was taking on the parent role to make sure I survived this. And I was so sick with grief piled up for so many years, I didn't recognize she was doing the same thing Colette did. And then she began to start portraying signs of obsessive compulsive behaviors. And she began to do repetitive things that seemed really minute at the beginning, you know, counting her steps, spelling things in her mind. And if they weren't an even amount of letters, she would have to find a word that was the same meaning, but it had an even amount of letters. And it got more and more and more and more intense. She started sneaking food in her room in the middle of the night. Anything she could do, I think, to distract her mind from thinking about what happened. And it got to the point to where about 4 or 5 weeks ago, she was unable to sleep. And Jill has always been a 12, 13 hour a night sleeper. Like, she's always been like, it's always amazed me. I've never had a child who just slept so well. And so for her to stop was really intense. And I was really, you know, afraid of how I could help her or if I could. And she does have a psychiatrist, and we do work with him. He is in another city 3 hours away, so it's all over the phone. We've seen him a few times in person. And 2 weeks ago, he diagnosed her officially with OCD with intrusive thoughts. And it's familiar, like I said, because Colette had the exact same thing. And OCD with intrusive thoughts is not, you know, touching the handle, the door handle 5 times. It's not washing your hands 7 times. It's not walking around the building 3 times before you go in. It's much worse. It's intrusive thoughts are thoughts that come to your head that you cannot control. And they're always bad. They're always negative. So the way Colette used to explain it to me is she would be driving down the road and her mind would all of a sudden say, "Why don't you just drive off the cliff?" But she didn't want to die. So she has this voice in her head telling her to do these things, or showing her scary things in her mind's eye. And she didn't want to die. She didn't want these things, but it was part of her mental health. And you know, she would wash the dishes and there would be a sharp knife in the sink, and she would think to herself, "Just cut your arm off, just cut your hand off, you know, just stab your hand." You know, and she had to fight that as an adult. And it was very, very hard for her. She suffered greatly, you know, and she never got the childhood that she deserved. She never got the love that she deserved from partners. She got into coping the wrong way, and her mind and her intrusive thoughts got the better of her, and she overdosed on fentanyl on accident. And I know she didn't do it on purpose. And my mom heard that. Colette telling her after she died, "I didn't mean to do this, Grandma. I didn't mean to do this. I'm so sorry." And I believe that with my whole heart. So back to Jill. She went from sleeping 12, 13 hours a night to like 3 or 4, if that. We would be up till 3 in the morning, her crying, her doing, body movements and things that showed me that she was really uncomfortable in her body, and screaming and yelling at me, and just anger, and it only came once I got better with my grief. And it got to, I'm like, I'm going through my treatment for my liver. I'm in the middle of my 2-month treatment where I'm supposed to be resting excessively during the day, not to mention sleeping at night, and I've gotten none. And that's okay, because we're going to manifest that this treatment's going to work no matter what. But I began getting worried. Obviously, she's not sleeping, sleep deprivation, anger, because she won't let herself be sad, and it's building and it's building and it's building and it's building, and it's, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm calling her doctor. What do I do? Da 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 da. And they want to keep putting her on more medicine, all these different things, and I'm right now unwilling to continue to give her different medications, because I believe, because I've seen that I can help her, and she responds when she's able, and she's starting to be able to respond. And she came into my room, mine and Randon's room, the other night about 1 in the morning, and asked, finally, Mommy, why can't I sleep? Why can't I sleep? What's wrong? And I said, and I was excited, because she'd been so intense for so many weeks that she couldn't listen to me. I couldn't get 2 words out without her, going off on something else. And so when she asked me that, I was really excited. And sorry, she, I was able to talk to her in that moment, because she really wanted help. She was exhausted, and she was starting to not understand things. Her brain was not doing well with that severe of lack of sleep, and she won't sleep during the day. She would just get these energy bursts that I've never seen anything like just, I can't stop, I can't hold still, I can't hold still, I can't, all, and it was so intense. And I'm exhausted, and I'm sad, and in my mind's thinking, this child needs to grieve. She needs to understand, so I start researching and all the things. Anyways, when she comes in and asks me why she can't sleep, she's genuine, and she's looking at me, and she's quiet, and she's looking for an answer. And I said, sweetie, because you reprogrammed your body to not sleep out of fear, because you don't want it to be quiet and still, because then your thoughts come. But, my darling, you can reprogram that, and I'm going to help you. And she's like, how? And I said, you start telling yourself every night before you go to bed, I can sleep. And she's like, but I can't. I said, I know, but your body doesn't know the difference. If you're telling your body you can sleep, it's going to listen. Right now, it's used to you saying, I'm not sleeping. I'm too scared to sleep. So you can condition yourself to begin to lose the habit that you've gotten yourself into, and get the rest you need. School's starting in 2 weeks, and we got to get there, sister, and so that night was fun. She's like, I can sleep. And then my partner, it's 1 a.m. He's like, I can sleep too. And then I'm like, I can sleep too. We're all yelling and laughing and stuff. And she still struggled. And I finally went back in her room and got her to sleep about 3 in the morning. But I felt like, here we go. This is a little bit of a start for her. A little bit of a start. And mind you, I am so exhausted, and I'm in so much pain, and I'm trying to heal my liver and deal with my eating disorder and all the things. I'm journaling, I'm doing shadow work, I'm just trying so hard. So I'm tired, but Jill comes before anything else. And so the next night was really rough, up again, screaming, all the things. And I thought, okay, do I need to just tell her the reality? Do I need to just make her face this? And I wasn't sure. All kids are different, but I know Jill. I know her very, very well. And I know she was pretending that this did not happen. And so I went into her room and I said, Jill, you know you're not going to see your sister again. And she covered her eyes and she said, don't. And I said, Jill, this is real. This is life. And some parts of life are sad. And some parts of life are very hard. And this is not fair. It is not fair that you have to go through this at your age. And I am so sorry. But we are going to get through this. And so I said, do you miss her? And she said, stop. And I said, I miss her. And she started screaming like I've never heard before anyone. I mean, like I was scared. I was worried. And she did it for so long. Her face was red. She was dripping with sweat. She was trying to breathe. Her eyes were wide. And she finally got out, why'd you do this to me? I wasn't ready to die. And I said, sweetheart, you're not going to die. She was crying makes you die. And I said, no, baby, it doesn't. But that was the conditioning I instilled in her, to be afraid of being sad, because I'm an empath and being sad does feel like dying. And she's an empath. And so thank goodness I could understand, And so I said, yes, it feels like that. It feels like you're dying, but you're not. And Jill, you're not going to get better until you start. Grief is a process. And if you don't start it, it's not going to ever get to the point to where it's ending. And it may never end completely. We're always going to miss her. But you have to go through these hard times unless you want to be 20 years old and have a complete mental breakdown, end up in certain ways. And so we got through that. She did that bloody murder curdling scream for probably about an hour. And then she said, help me stop crying, and so I did everything I could, and I just, started trying to talk to her about different things, and she finally stopped crying. And then she just started talking to me about just things, she's like, oh, look, look at this toy, Mom, look what it does, whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool, and we talked for quite a while that night. And then I finally got her to sleep. And the next morning she asked me why I did that, why I tricked her. And I said, sweetie, I didn't trick you. I needed you to understand where your anger is coming from. It's coming from you not being able to be sad. And she goes, I don't want to be sad. I said, nobody does. But we had something very sad happen to us. And we have to deal with it. And everybody deals with it in their own way. I'm not going to make you deal with it in the way I'm dealing with it if it's not comfortable, but we have to deal with it. And so I've got some books on order. I've, like I said, done a ton of research, and I found videos for her to watch, and I'm going to kind of let her lead from this point on, because when I talked to her about saying I can sleep and reprogramming her conditioning, she believed it, because Jill has manifested. Sometimes I think she doesn't listen, but she manifests, and she does it well. And so I tied that in with it. I said, you have the power to tell your body you can sleep because you've had the power to manifest. There was a day me and Randon and her were going out on a family trip, and I got sick, and I wasn't going to be able to go, and Randon was going to just go ahead and take her. And she got really sad. She wanted it to be a family. She's never had a family, and we finally do. And so it was about 3 hours before we were getting ready to leave, and I was just laying in bed, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I can't go. I'm in pain. And about 10 minutes before they were going to leave, my pain subsided completely, and I felt completely normal. And I was like, I think I can go. And Jill came up to me, and she said, since you told me you were sick, I've been saying, Mommy's going to get better. Mommy's better. Mommy's not sick. Mommy's coming. Mommy's better. Mommy's not sick. Mommy's coming. And she did that for 3 hours straight in her mind. And I got better. And she was so giddy, that she did that. And I was so proud of her. And I said, do you see the power of language, the power of thought, the power of will. And she did. And there were a couple other really intense things that she manifested, and they're about other people, so I'm not going to talk about the details of it. But so she has the experience, and this grief and not sleeping and stuff, you know, it comes along with fear. The other ones didn't. But last night, she went to bed at 11 o'clock, and she got up at 10. So she got 11 hours of sleep. And I'm so thankful. I am so thankful. And I know we're not out of the woods yet, but she's starting to believe again that she can control, you know, her own thoughts and her own, you know, she can change these things, because I, as a mom, know that I can recondition myself. You know, I've been, every night before bed, I'm a non-smoker. I'm an amazing, conscious mom. I'm a best-selling artist. You know, what, all the things that I try to recondition, you know, because my conditioning is I'm poor, I can't do anything to make money, I'm failing, and I'm worthless. And that's a lot of conditioning from my abuser. But as I'm conditioning myself every night, when you get into the relaxed state, as you're going to bed, as you're in bed and you're falling asleep, but you're not asleep yet, your body's asleep, but your brain's awake, start telling yourself the things that you want to reprogram. And after a week, sometimes a month, sometimes a few days, the reprogramming happens. And I have been doing it for a while, and I'm getting, you know, sicker and sicker and sicker of smoking. I'm becoming very much more conscious with my daughter, with my own thoughts, with my abilities, and I'm becoming more I have more confidence in me as a parent, which I've never had. Never. And that confidence is showing outward. That energy, that confident energy is going outward. And Jillian is seeing it. So letting go of the guilt, leading by example. You know, she sees that I'm not in fight or flight. She sees that I'm, yes, grieving, but I'm okay. And that I'm putting everything I have into her and helping her. And that's leading by example. And that is how children are programmed. And she's starting. We have a couple weeks before school starts, and she's so excited. She loves school. And she has to rest before that. And that is also a driving force for her. So bottom line is, when you have children, you have from in utero to 7 years old to condition and program them. If you're not yourself conscious, and if you're not able to see truths and reality, you're not going to understand how you're programming your children. You know, one example is a family that likes to party and drink, and they have parties, you know, every weekend, whatever. And they get loud and obnoxious, and the kids are just running around, and, you know, fights break out, even if it's just drunk wrestling, whatever it may be. And like I said, this is just an example, but the kids see all this. And so then they're rough, and they wrestle, and they break things, and they call each other names, and they're rowdy, and then they get in trouble. They get in trouble for doing what they see their parents doing. And that's on us, my friends, my fellow parents. That's on us. If you have children under 7, you have the opportunity to start today to consciously program them in a healthy and unconditional, loving way. And if I could go back in time, that's what I would be doing. but I'm doing it now, and I can't go back in time, and I'm letting go of that too. That doesn't help anything. You know, right now is the time that we have. This moment is what I have. This moment. And this moment, I'm sharing my truth. And after my podcast, I'm spending time with my daughter. And my 25-year-old daughter and my grandsons are coming over today. And I get to be conscious. I get to spend time with them and be in the moment. Not thinking about what's going to happen next, not thinking about my trauma. Conscious in the moment. And that's what our kids deserve. They deserve to be programmed lovingly with unconditional love. Unconditional love is the answer to literally everything in this world. Literally everything. And that's what I'm viewing sharing as unconditional love. I'm telling you guys things that are very personal and very difficult because I want you to know that if you're experiencing any of it, you're not alone. None of us are. We've just been conditioned to stay quiet. That's literally part of our conditioning as parents. You keep your dirty laundry to yourself. You don't air it out. Bullshit. How else are we going to learn? And how else are we going to help each other? We need to become a community of one. Unity. And the only way I know how to do that is to parallel our lives. My mouth, I need a drink. Parallel our lives. Babe, can you bring me a drink, please? Sorry. And I want to hear your truths. I want to learn from you. I want to feel not alone when I feel alone. I felt so alone when I was being abused. My children were killed. I didn't know I was being abused. And I don't want that for anybody else. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for my kids. My 2 kids that I have left. I want the very best for them. So the whole idea here, first of all, is if your children are younger than 7, you have time. Become conscious. Become aware of what you're teaching them and what you're showing them and what they're mimicking. They're humans. They're not, children should be seen and not heard, and their children are resilient and all the things. Maybe they are, but you still have your responsibility as a parent. And knowing that we can do this, knowing and understanding programming, now you really have the responsibility to do it. And it doesn't fucking matter how hard it is, because let me tell you, this is hard and I am tired. But it's important. And my daughter is going to have a good life. And she's not going to go down from trauma like my other one did. It's not happening. My daughter's here, my 25-year-old. So I'm going to go. But unity, sharing, and unity, and truth, and love. Unconditional love. If you have any questions, because I'm cutting off short, put them in the comments and I'll get back on here. I love you all so very much. And thank you for letting me share my truth. And I would love to hear any advice, any thoughts, anything in the comments. We're coming together as one. I'm making it happen, you guys. You got to help me. Have a good day and smile beautiful.